Saul had won the battle, but the sound of living animals would cost him his kingdom. He greeted Samuel like an obedient king, confident that the mission was complete. Then Samuel stopped. Beneath the celebration, he heard a sound that should not exist. Sheep, cattle, spoils from an enemy Saul had been commanded to destroy completely. For one suspended moment, Saul understood. His public victory had become evidence against him. How could a king defeat an army, yet lose the kingdom before the day was over? To understand this judgment, we must return to Israel's first exhausted days beyond Egypt. They were newly freed, poorly supplied, and learning how survival in the desert demanded unity. Then Amalek struck, attacking the weak and weary at the rear of the journey. Israel remembered not only an enemy, but an assault on people least able to defend themselves. At Rephidim, Joshua led Israel's defenders while Moses climbed the hill above them. The struggle below rose and fell with Moses' hands, turning battle into a lesson about dependence. When his strength failed, Aaron and Hur held his arms until the sun descended. Joshua prevailed, but the story ended with a warning. This hostility would not be forgotten. Deuteronomy later commanded Israel to remember Amalek's attack and protect the meaning of justice. Now, in Saul's reign, Samuel declared that the old account had reached a moment of judgment. Samuel reminded Saul that his crown was not self-made. He had been appointed through God's word. "The Lord sent me to anoint you king," Samuel said. Now listen to his message. The message recalled what Amalek had done when Israel came up from Egypt. What followed was not presented as ordinary expansion, but as judgment within Israel's sacred history. The command allowed no trophies, no royal prisoner, and no wealth disguised as reward. Saul's face revealed no open rebellion. The danger began as calculation hidden beneath obedience. He had once seemed small in his own eyes. Kingship had quietly changed what he feared losing. Samuel left him with a command whose meaning was clear, even if its weight was terrible. By sunrise, messengers were already riding and running toward Israel's tribal territories. At Telaim, Saul gathered a force vast enough to make resistance appear almost impossible. The account numbers 200,000 foot soldiers with 10,000 men from Judah. Numbers could win a campaign. They could not decide whether the king would remain faithful afterward. Weapons were checked, water skins filled, and the southern road disappeared beneath marching feet. The army moved from settled hills into harsher country, where wadis cut through stone and dust. Scouts went ahead, reading tracks and searching for the settlement hidden beyond the ravines. But another community lived nearby. The Kenites, remembered for kindness during Israel's wilderness years. Saul warned them to leave, separating them from the judgment directed against Amalek. The Kenites departed, carrying what they could before the valley became a place of war. Only after they were clear did Saul bring his army down toward the wadi. From the heights, Saul watched the opening succeed and ordered the center forward. Inside the settlement, Agag learned that the road of escape was already narrowing. Agag called his fighters together, but dust on every ridge announced the scale of Saul's force. The fighting spread from the wadi into open ground, where numbers began deciding the outcome. Israel pressed from Havilah toward Shur, the text describing a campaign across a broad region. Camp after camp fell silent as Saul's army continued, leaving no triumphant music behind it. For the soldiers, victory promised survival, honor, and perhaps the wealth their command had forbidden. The army's advance continued, but another battle had already begun inside Saul's command. By afternoon, organized resistance had collapsed and Agag's own guard was driven back. He looked for an opening, but every path now ended beneath Israelite spears. Agag was taken alive, a living trophy where the command had allowed none. The battle was effectively over. The decision that ruined Saul came after the enemy was defeated. With danger gone, soldiers began separating the strongest animals from everything they considered worthless. The distinction was revealing. What had little value was destroyed. What looked profitable was spared. Agag remained alive nearby, still dressed as a king even with rope around his wrists. Saul saw the selection. No hidden officer made this choice beyond the king's knowledge. Perhaps he called it mercy, perhaps strategy. The text gives a simpler word. They were unwilling. Partial obedience offered Saul everything: victory, public approval, valuable animals, and a captive king. It also gave him a story to tell. These animals could become sacrifices at Gilgal. The explanation sounded religious. That did not make it obedient. Saul gave no order to release Agag or abandon the animals. The camp understood his silence. By nightfall, the forbidden spoils were traveling with Israel as if they belonged in the victory. And through the dark, the animals kept making the sound that would later expose him. Before returning to Gilgal, Saul went to Carmel, where victory became something more personal. There, the king set up a monument to himself before continuing toward Gilgal. Stone, crown, captive, and cattle now told the same story. Victory had become possession. Then, Saul turned toward Gilgal, carrying both his explanation and the proof against it. But before Samuel met Saul, the word of the Lord came to the prophet during the night. "I regret that I have made Saul king," the message declared, "for he has turned back." The language does not portray ignorance. It portrays grief, rupture, and a kingship now rejected. Samuel was angry, wounded, and faithful enough to cry out through the entire night. Before dawn, grief became resolve. Samuel rose to confront the king he had once anointed. Samuel first searched for Saul, only to learn that the king had raised a monument at Carmel. He followed the road to Gilgal, where sacrifice, kingship, and memory already carried deep meaning. Saul saw Samuel coming and stepped forward with the confidence of a man expecting praise. "Blessed are you," Saul said. "I have carried out the command of the Lord." It was a complete claim of obedience spoken while the evidence stood only yards away. Then a sheep bleated, small and ordinary, yet louder than every royal word Saul had spoken. Samuel listened again. Cattle answered from deeper inside the camp. The prophet's question was simple. "What then is this bleating in my ears?" For the first time that morning, Saul's certainty hesitated. His answer began with distance. "They brought them. Not I, not we. They." Saul said the people had spared the best animals for sacrifice to Samuel's God. He added that everything else had been destroyed, as though one obedient part erased the other. "Stop," Samuel answered. The single word ended Saul's careful explanation. Across the camp, soldiers fell silent. Even the animals seemed to wait. Samuel began where pride had started. Though you were small in your own eyes, God had made him head of Israel's tribes and anointed him king over the nation. That gift made Saul accountable. Authority did not reduce obedience. It increased its weight. Samuel repeated the mission, "Go, confront Amalek, and continue until the command was completed." Then came the question Saul could not escape. "Why did you pounce on the spoil?" Saul answered with another denial, "But I did obey the voice of the Lord." He pointed to the completed journey and the defeated enemy, measuring obedience by visible results. And there stood Agag, living proof that Saul had edited the command for himself. Again, Saul shifted the final choice toward the people, admitting their action while minimizing his own. The best sheep and cattle, he repeated, were meant to honor God through sacrifice at Gilgal. Samuel answered with one of Scripture's clearest tests of religious performance. Does the Lord delight in offerings as much as in listening to what he has commanded? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen better than the fat of rams. Religious language could not transform rebellion into worship or stubbornness into faithfulness. Because Saul had rejected the word, Samuel declared that Saul was rejected as king.